Welcome back to Horror Stories Hub, the place where forgotten true stories are brought into the light and the whispers in the darkness are given a voice. Tonight, we're not heading to the bustling cities of New York. Instead, we're traveling to the outskirts, where decaying architecture conceals terrifying secrets. Our destination is the Pennhurst Asylum, a name that alone is enough to send a chill down your spine. Shut down in the 1980s, following a series of scandals over inhumane treatment, Pennhurst was left abandoned, a place where time itself seems to stand still within its walls. Everything was left intact: the rusting hospital beds, the haunting medical equipment, and the echoes of suffering from thousands of souls. Tonight, we hear a story of ambition, recklessness, and a price that was far too high to pay. A group of 3 student filmmakers broke into Pennhurst to shoot a horror documentary, believing it was their ticket to fame. But instead of a masterpiece, they found a tomb. We will hear this entire story from the only account that survived, the testimony of the project's director, the one who witnessed everything, the story of a survivor burdened by the nightmare. What follows is Sarah's experience.
No, please don't let this be true. Please. The cold in here is different. It's not the cold of an October in New York. It's the cold of concrete, of decay, and of being forgotten. We were in the basement of Pennhurst, the morgue. The light from our flashlights danced across the stainless steel autopsy tables, which were covered in a layer of dust as thick as snow. The air was heavy with the smell of old disinfectant and something else, something cloyingly sweet like rotting meat. Chloe, my sound tech, had already dry heaved twice. She kept muttering about whispers the mic was picking up, but I dismissed it. I figured it was just the wind whistling through the ruined corridors. I was wrong. God, I should have listened to her. But at that moment, I wasn't paying attention to anything but the massive shadow in the corner of the room. The corpse elevator. It wasn't like any elevator you've ever seen. It was a bare metal cage, like a steel rib cage, suspended in a dark brick shaft by wrist-thick cables so rusted they looked ready to snap. It was designed for one purpose: to bring the dead up from this morgue to ground level. And Mark, my cameraman, was looking at it like he had just found the Holy Grail. "Sarah, look," he whispered, his voice full of excitement. "This is it. The shot of a lifetime." Filming from the inside, looking out, the dead man's POV. That was Mark, reckless, bold, and always obsessed with getting the shot nobody else could. He was the best I knew, and also the craziest. A part of me was screaming that this was a terrible idea. The cage didn't look stable. The entire mechanism had been eaten away by time. But another part of me, the ugly, ambitious part of a young director desperate to make a name for herself, whispered back in my ear, "He's right. No one will have this shot. You'll be famous." I saw Chloe shaking her head violently in the dark, her eyes wide and pleading, but I ignored her. I nodded at Mark. It was the mistake that would haunt me for the rest of my life. He stepped inside, the camera resting on his shoulder. The light from his camera swept around the cramped cage, revealing dark stains on the metal floor. "Damn, it's a bit tight," Mark said, pointing to a smaller, secondary cable that was frayed and sagging, blocking a corner of his frame. "Hand me the wire cutters." "Mark, don't," Chloe pleaded, her voice nearly breaking. "Let's just go, please." "Just a second," Mark laughed, that same familiar, smug grin on his face. He always thought he was in control of everything. I hesitated. My heart was pounding in my chest. But then I handed him the cutters from my tool bag. He reached out, the blades of the cutters clamping down on the frayed cable. Everything happened in a split second, a snap, sharp, decisive. Then silence. A terrifying moment of silence before all hell broke loose. A horrific force threw me and Chloe backward. Cement dust and metal fragments filled the air, making us choke. My flashlight was knocked out of my hand. Darkness swallowed everything. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything but the sound of my own heartbeat. It took me a few seconds to get my bearings. "Mark?" I called out, my voice cracking. "Mark!" There was no answer, only a faint intermittent groan. And another sound. A wet, thick sound. I crawled in the dark, my hands searching for the flashlight. My fingers brushed against its cold metal case. I switched it on, and I wish I hadn't. The trembling beam cut through the thick dust. The cage where Mark had been standing was gone. In its place was a massive, deformed block of metal, the main elevator car which had plummeted from above, filling the shaft. And pinned between the morgue floor and that brutal block of steel was Mark. I could only see his legs. The rest of his body was crushed beneath it. One arm was sticking out, the fingers twitching weakly, still trying to reach for the camera that lay a few inches away, its lens shattered. Chloe's scream tore through the silence. But I couldn't scream. I could only stare, my throat closing up. The thick smell of fresh blood hit my nostrils. And that's when I realized there was no phone signal. Our only exit was blocked. We were trapped. Trapped underground with our dying friend. In this darkness, while the smell of blood and dust chokes me, my mind does something cruel. It won't let me face reality. Instead, it goes back. It goes back 3 months to when everything was still an idea, a burning dream on paper. I'm Sarah, 21 years old. A final year film student obsessed with creating something real. Not some cheap horror movie with cliché jump scares. I wanted to make a documentary. A film that delved into the psychology of fear, exploring how a place can hold on to the pain of its past. My senior thesis, my golden ticket. And Pennhurst was the perfect stage. I spent months in the library, devouring every article, every book, watching every piece of old documentary footage about the place. The stories of brutality, of patient abuse, of inhumane experiments. They horrified me, but at the same time, they lit a fire in me. I presented the idea to my thesis advisor. He, an old man with tired eyes, warned me. "Sarah," he said, "some places are best left to history. Don't go digging up what's been buried." I smiled and told him I'd be careful. I thought he was just being overly cautious. I couldn't do this alone. I needed a team. And my team consisted of my 2 best friends. First, there was Mark. Mark wasn't just a cameraman. He was a visual artist. He had an eye for things like no one I'd ever seen. Mark didn't see the world, he framed it. He could find the beauty in decay, find the story in forgotten dark corners. We had worked on several small projects together, and he was always the one pushing me to go further. "This shot is fine, Sarah," he'd say, "but it's not the one that'll make a name for us. We need something that leaves the audience breathless." His recklessness worried me as much as I admired it. He was the type to climb an abandoned building in a thunderstorm just to get a shot of a lightning strike. He was fire. And then there was Chloe. Chloe was ice. She was our sound technician, someone with ears so sharp she could probably hear a leaf fall half a block away. Chloe was the opposite of Mark in every way. She was cautious, sensitive, and always saw the danger where Mark and I only saw opportunity. She was our voice of reason, the one who always reminded us to double-check our gear, bring extra batteries, and not to do anything stupid. To be honest, she didn't want to be part of the Pennhurst project at first. "I have a bad feeling about that place, Sarah," she'd said, her voice full of worry. But she was loyal. She believed in my vision, and she knew I couldn't do it without her. In the end, I convinced her. A hollow promise that we'd only stay on the outside, that we'd be safe. The day we drove to Pennhurst, the weather was strangely beautiful. The sun was golden, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. We sang along to old songs on the radio, ate potato chips, and talked about how this film was going to change our lives. Mark had all his shots planned out. Chloe was checking her recording equipment for the 10th time. And me, I felt like a general heading into battle, invincible. But when we turned onto the road that led to the asylum, things started to change. The trees along the roadside became skeletal and bare, their branches reaching out like bony arms. Modern buildings gave way to old, decaying farmhouses. The air seemed to thicken, and a silence began to creep in through the open car windows. And then we saw it. Pennhurst appeared on a hilltop, more massive and menacing than any photograph I had ever seen. It was a monster of brick and mortar, its shattered windows like hundreds of vacant eyes staring down at us. The paint was peeling, and ivy crept up the walls like pale green veins. The car stopped. For a long moment, none of us said anything. Mark was the first to break the silence. "A masterpiece," he breathed, his eyes lighting up. He was already seeing his frames. I whispered, "The perfect set." I was already seeing my movie, but Chloe, she said nothing at all. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her face was pale, and she was unconsciously hugging herself. She saw something different. Something that my and Mark's naive ambition had blinded us to. She saw the truth. That night, under a dim moon, we found a hole in the barbed wire fence. That was our way in. At that moment, I felt like a director in complete control, leading my actors onto an elaborately constructed set. I confidently whispered, "Action," to myself as I slipped through the fence. But the truth is, from the second we set foot on that cursed ground, we were no longer in control of the story. We were just characters about to be written out. The first moment I stepped inside the main hall of Pennhurst, my breath caught in my chest, not out of fear, but awe. It was hauntingly beautiful. Moonlight streamed through the towering windows, painting silver streaks across the cracked marble floor. Dust motes hung in the air like ghostly fireflies. The smell of the place was a mixture of damp decay, old paper, and a pungent odor I can only describe as the smell of sickness and sorrow left behind. "Lights up," I ordered, my voice echoing in the vast space. "Mark, get me a wide shot from here. Slow pan from left to right. I want to capture all of this decay." At first, everything went according to plan. We worked like a well-oiled machine. Mark moved gracefully with the camera, finding the perfect angles. I scribbled in my notebook, planning out the next shots. Only Chloe was acting strange. She wore headphones, her hands gripping the boom mic, but her eyes were constantly darting around, as if she were listening to something beyond the scope of her job. The first crack appeared when we were on the second floor, in a long corridor lined with dozens of patient room doors. Mark was getting a close-up of an overturned wheelchair, its wheels still spinning slowly in the breeze. I was watching his monitor when suddenly, Chloe ripped her headphones off. The color drained from her face. Did you guys hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark and I glanced at each other. "Hear what?" Mark asked, his eyes still glued to his camera. "I just hear the wind." No, it wasn't the wind, Chloe insisted. It sounded like a child crying far away at the end of the hall. I focused, listening intently. Silence washed over us. There was only the sound of the wind whistling through a broken window and my own heartbeat. There was no crying. Your headphones are probably just too sensitive, Chloe, I said, trying to reassure her and myself. They pick up frequencies the naked ear can't. It could be rats or the old pipe settling. She looked at me, her eyes full of doubt and fear. But she didn't say anything else, just quietly put her headphones back on. I had rationalized it. I had found a logical explanation because my brain, the brain of a filmmaker working on her passion project, wouldn't allow for anything supernatural to interfere. But then we entered the children's ward. The animal murals on the walls were faded and peeling. Dozens of rusted iron cribs were lined up in neat rows. Toys were scattered across the floor, covered in a thick layer of dust. This place should have been filled with laughter, but now all that remained was a heavy silence. And in the middle of the room, there was a rocking horse. It was moving. Very slowly, very gently, creak dot dot dot, creak dot dot. Forward and back. This time we all saw it. Mark slowly lowered his camera. Chloe stood frozen in place, her hand covering her mouth to stifle a scream. There was no wind in this room. No draft strong enough to move a heavy, solid wood toy like that. What the hell? Mark whispered. He was the first to regain his composure, raising the camera and zooming in on the rocking horse. This dot dot, this is incredible. It's the uneven floor, I mumbled. My own explanation sounded weak and desperate even to me. It's just balancing itself. No one believed me. The rocking horse continued to sway, a steady, ghostly rhythm in the dead silence. It was as if an invisible child had just left it moments before we walked in. We were not alone. The feeling was so clear I could feel unseen eyes following our every move. We left the children's ward in silence, the initial excitement completely gone, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The crack was no longer a hairline fracture. It was beginning to spread. And then it shattered. We were heading down another hallway, planning to explore the cafeteria before going down to the basement. Mark was in front, I was behind him, and Chloe was last. We all screamed and jumped. We spun around. One of the patient room doors at the end of the hall, a door we were sure had been open as we passed, was now slammed shut. Its echo still hung in the air. This wasn't the wind. This wasn't a slanted floor. This was a deliberate act, a violent act. As if someone had used all their strength to slam the door right behind us. A message. A warning, get out. Okay, that's it, Chloe sobbed, tears streaming down her face. I can't do this anymore. I want to go home. Right now, Sarah. Mark didn't say anything, but he lowered his camera, his hand clenched. The usual smug look on his face was gone, replaced by pure tension. Reason was screaming in my head, telling me to listen to Chloe, to pack up our things and run from this godforsaken place. But my ambition, that demon, it screamed louder. You got it all on camera. The crying, the rocking horse, the slamming door. This is pure gold, Sarah. Don't stop now. Just one last place, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. We've come this far. The best shots, the creepiest shots, are always in the most forbidden places. The basement. The morgue. We go down there, get a few quick shots, and then we leave. I chose ambition over safety. I chose to go down, to venture deeper into the darkness. A decision that sealed all three of our fates. The door to the basement was heavy, and it groaned in protest as Mark pushed it open. A blast of cold, musty air immediately rushed up, carrying the smell of damp earth and decay. It was completely different from the air on the upper floors. It was heavier, more suffocating, as if we were stepping into another world, a place where the air had been stagnant for decades. "Watch your step," I said, though the warning was more for myself. The beams from our flashlights danced on the concrete steps, slick with moss. We descended in silence, the sound of our footsteps the only thing breaking the stillness. Each step seemed to pull us further from the outside world, further from safety. I tried to focus on the job, on directing Mark to get some dramatic shots of the ruin around us. But my mind couldn't stop thinking about the door that had slammed upstairs. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a warning, and we had ignored it. The moment our feet hit the basement floor, a sudden feeling of being watched washed over me. It was so intense that I spun around, shining my flashlight into the darkness at the top of the stairs. There was nothing there, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just followed us down. Chloe stopped suddenly, her body rigid. Her eyes were wide, staring into the space in front of her. "It's back," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What's back?" Mark snapped, his own nerves clearly stretched thin. "The whispering," Chloe said, her trembling hand pointing to her microphone. "But this time, ... it's close." Before I could rationalize it, before I could say it was the wind or the pipes again, I heard it, not through headphones, with my own ears. A cold whisper brushing past my ear like an icy breath. S ... My blood ran cold. That wasn't a random sound. It knew my name. It was here right beside us in this darkness. Mark swore under his breath, taking a step back, frantically sweeping his flashlight into the dark corners. Chloe broke into silent, heaving sobs. The fear was no longer vague, it had become an entity. It had a voice, and it knew who we were. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice breaking. Back the way we came. Now, my ambition was dead. All that was left was the instinct to survive. But when we turned back to the path we had just come from, a hallway leading to the foot of the stairs, we found our way blocked. A massive metal filing cabinet, one that reached the ceiling and must have weighed a ton, was now lying across the hallway. Minutes ago, it had been flat against the wall. There was no way the three of us could have moved it, let alone it moving by itself. The scrape marks on the concrete floor were fresh. It had been pushed deliberately to block our retreat. No ... no way, Mark stammered, rushing forward and trying to push the cabinet. It didn't budge. It's jammed. Panic began to set in. We were trapped. We were being hunted and herded into a trap. This wasn't an exploration anymore. This was a hunt. And we were the prey. The phones. I yelled, pulling out my cell with trembling hands. "Call 911. The screen displayed the words I dreaded most. No service. Chloe's and Mark's were the same. We were completely cut off from the outside world. As if to rub salt on our wounds, our equipment started to rebel. The light on Mark's camera began to flicker violently before dying completely. He checked the battery. "Impossible," he muttered. "I fully charged it before we came in. Now it's completely drained." Chloe's microphone began to emit a deafening shriek of static, forcing her to rip off her headphones and throw them to the ground. Our technology, our shield, our connection to logic and reality was betraying us. We tried to find another way, frantically shining our lights down dark, branching hallways that felt like a maze. But every time we chose a path, we would hear a sound up ahead scraping on the walls. A heavy dragging, as if something was hurting us, cutting off all escape routes and leaving only a single path open, the path leading deeper into the basement. Finally, we stood before the one hallway that was silent. The air here was significantly colder, and the disinfectant smell I had noticed in the main hall was now overpowering. I knew where this path led, so did Chloe. "Don't," she sobbed, clinging to my arm. "Sarah, please, don't go that way." But what other choice do we have? Stay here and wait for whatever was toying with us to come and get us? Or move forward and hope for another exit up ahead? "We don't have a choice," I said, though every word felt like a knife. I pried her hand off my arm and stepped forward. The only path left was to keep going. Toward the cold, toward the smell of deathly chemicals. The path that led straight to the morgue. We were no longer story hunters. We had become the prey. This was it, the final path, the door to the morgue. It was made of thick steel with a small window of frosted wire glass. The hospital green paint was peeling, revealing patches of rust underneath. The chemical smell was so strong I had to cover my nose. Mark stood before the door, clutching his dead camera like a useless weapon. Chloe was behind me, trembling, her hands clamped onto my jacket. No one wanted to push that door open. We knew instinctively somehow that once this door was open, there would be no hope left. But the silence behind us was even more terrifying. The silence of a predator that was waiting. "We have to go," Mark said, his voice hoarse. He didn't wait for my agreement, slamming his shoulder against the door. The cold hit us like a wall of ice, a bone-chilling cold. Colder than the air outside. The beams from our flashlights cut across a large, morbidly clean room. 3 stainless steel autopsy tables stood in parallel in the middle of the room, their surfaces gleaming under the light. Along one wall was a bank of body lockers, their square metal doors like silent tombstones. A few of the doors were slightly ajar, revealing a deep darkness within. The floor sloped gently toward a drain in the center. Everything was designed for one purpose: to process the dead. I felt sick. This place was too clean. As if it were still in use. "Find another way out," I ordered, my voice trembling. "Check the walls, look for any windows or ventilation shafts." We split up, desperately searching for a glimmer of hope. Mark shone his light along the white-tiled walls. Chloe timidly approached the bank of lockers, trying not to look inside. I checked the area behind the operating tables. There were only metal trays, bone saws, and other horrific medical instruments, all neatly arranged. "Nothing," Mark said, his voice full of disappointment. "It's just a wall. This place is a dead end." A dead end. The words echoed in my head. A perfect trap. But then Mark stopped. The beam from his flashlight focused on the corner of the room, where the corpse elevator I had read about in the documents stood, silent as a sleeping monster. The rusty metal cage. The thick, braided cables. "Wait," Mark said, a spark of hope in his voice. "The shaft. It has to lead up. To the ground floor, or at least the first floor. If we can climb ... He didn't finish the sentence. He walked quickly toward the elevator. His familiar recklessness was back, but this time it wasn't driven by ambition, but by desperation. "Mark, don't!" Chloe yelled. "It doesn't look safe." "Safer than staying here to die?" He shot back, his hand already on the cage's lattice door. He pulled it open. The metal groaned again. SARHVO. My heart was pounding in my chest. "Don't do it, Mark." A thought screamed in my head. "This is a trap. That thing herded us here. It wants us here." but I couldn't say the words out loud. A part of me was also clinging to that fragile hope. "Climb, get out of here." Mark stepped into the cage. It was cramped, dark. He looked up, shining his flashlight into the deep, dark shaft above. "See?" he said, his voice echoing from within. "There's a service ladder running along the wall. I can climb it, but ... He stopped. "But what?" I asked, almost holding my breath. "There's a tangled cable," he said. "A secondary cable. It's sagging, blocking the way to the ladder. Damn it, I need to get it out of the way." He tried to push the old frayed cable with his hand, but it was stuck fast against a metal bar. "No good," he muttered. "It's jammed tight. I'm going to have to cut it." "No." Chloe and I yelled in unison. "It's not the main cable." Mark snapped, his patience worn thin. "This is just an old safety line. It's not even connected to anything. It's just in the way. Hand me the cutters." He didn't ask. He ordered. His eyes looked at me pleading. The eyes of a friend begging for a tool to save all three of us. What did I do? Why did I do it? My trembling hand reached into the tool bag on my hip, pulled out the wire cutters. The metal was cold, heavy. I handed them to him. God, forgive me. I handed them to him. He took them, without a moment's hesitation. He turned around, raised the cutters. The sharp blades clamped down on the frayed cable. Time seemed to stop. I saw everything clearly. The flashlight reflecting off the blades. The small steel fibers of the cable straining. Mark's focused expression. Chloe's lips moving in a silent prayer. The breath was trapped in my throat. No ... That moment, it lasted forever. That secondary cable. It wasn't a safety line. It was more like a final cotter pin. A single, rusted pin that had kept the entire decaying mechanism above from collapsing for 40 years. And we had just cut it. The screech turned into a roar. The roar of a metal beast plummeting down from the darkness. I didn't have time to scream. I didn't have time to do anything. I could only watch. The massive shadow of the main elevator car swallowed the light. It plunged. The floor shook beneath my feet. The force of the impact threw me and Chloe backward. My head slammed against the concrete floor. Everything went black for a second. When I opened my eyes, the air was thick with dust and the smell of burnt ozone. My ears were ringing. I couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine. My flashlight was gone. Darkness was everywhere. "Mark?" I choked, calling his name. "Mark?" Only Chloe's hysterical crying answered me. I crawled on the floor. It was cold, wet. My hands surged, fumbling for the light, for something to hold on to in this nightmare. My fingers touched the flashlight. I switched it on, a trembling beam. It cut through the dust. The cage was gone. The elevator shaft was filled with a massive twisted block of black metal. That block of metal was pressing down on something on the floor. A dark pool of liquid was spreading out from underneath it. And sticking out from under the metal ... was an arm. It wasn't twitching anymore. It was still. The fingers were still reaching for Mark's camera. The camera was now shattered, lying a few inches away, but there was something even more horrific. From beneath the block of metal, from where Mark's chest should have been, I heard a sound. Not a groan, not a scream. It was a wet, rattling breath, a gurgling sound. The sound of air trying to pass through a crushed lung filled with blood. He was still alive. Oh my God, he was still alive. Pinned, crushed, but still alive. And that's when I started to scream. Screaming doesn't help. In the darkness of the Pennhurst morgue, your screams are just swallowed by the cold walls and thrown back at you as silence. After my throat was raw and my tears had run dry, all that was left was a cruel reality. We were trapped, and Mark was dying. The first day passed in a haze of panic and denial. We tried, God, we tried. We used all our strength to push the block of metal, but it was as if it had been welded to the concrete floor. We screamed for help until our voices were hoarse. It was useless. Mark, I called, my voice trembling, crawling closer to the horrific mass of steel. Mark, can you hear me? Help is coming. They're on their way. You just have to hold on. A faint groan answered me, followed by a wet, choking cough. I didn't have to see to know he was coughing up blood. That sound, his breathing, it became the soundtrack to our existence. A gruesome, relentless rhythm of a life being strangled. Rattle. Gurgle ... inhale ... rattle ... gurgle ... exhale. It was our countdown clock. Each of his breaths was another second passing in our own private hell. Chloe had completely broken down. She sat huddled in a dark corner, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes staring blankly into space. She didn't speak, didn't eat or drink. Occasionally, she would shiver violently and begin muttering nonsense. I lost her on that first day. Now it was just me and that sound. Our flashlight batteries were the most precious things we had. I only turned them on when absolutely necessary to check on Mark, to find a drip of water from an old pipe, to make sure Chloe was still breathing. Most of the time, we were in absolute darkness. A darkness so thick you could feel the weight of it. In that darkness, your hearing becomes cruelly sharp. I could hear my own heartbeat, my teeth chattering from the cold, and that sound, always that sound. The second day, the third, they blurred together. Time lost all meaning. There was no day, no night, only darkness and breathing. Hunger and thirst began to torment us. I found a puddle of stagnant water and we drank from it. It tasted like mud and rust, but it kept us alive. My mind started playing cruel tricks on me. I started to hear other things in the dark. The child's cry that Chloe had heard. The creak of the rocking horse. The slam of the door. It was as if the whole asylum was whispering to me, mocking our suffering. You did this, they seemed to say. Your ambition killed him. And they were right. The image of me handing Mark the wire cutters are played in my mind like a broken film. My hand, the cutters, his desperate smile, that snap. I had handed the weapon to my own executioner. The weight of that guilt was heavier than the metal crushing Mark. On the fourth day, I think Mark's voice rasped my name. Sarah ... I quickly turned on the flashlight, crawling closer. I'm here, Mark. I'm here. He didn't say anything else. He just moved his free arm slightly. The arm that was still reaching out, he pointed a finger toward the broken camera. I didn't understand. But I think maybe it was the last thing he saw, the last thing he cared about. His work, his creation. Even while dying, he was a cameraman. That was the last time he spoke. After that, his breathing grew weaker. The rhythm slowed. The silence between each breath grew frighteningly long. And then, sometime on the fifth day, it stopped. The silence. It came so suddenly. It was deafening. After days of being tortured by the sounds of death, its absence was infinitely more horrific. Mark? I whispered into the darkness. No answer. Mark? I called out louder, an icy dread spreading through my chest. Silence was the only reply. He was gone. I didn't cry. I had no tears left to cry. I just sat there in the dark next to the body of my best friend and another friend who was alive but might as well have been dead. For the first time in days, I felt truly alone. The monster had gotten what it wanted. The game was over. I don't know how long I sat like that, maybe a day, maybe more. I didn't care anymore, I was just waiting for the darkness to come and take me too. Then I heard a new sound, not a whisper, not a creak, a noise from far away. The sound of metal being broken, the sound of people shouting. Light. It felt like a knife stabbing into my eyes after days spent in darkness. Powerful beams from police flashlights swept across the room, chasing away the shadows and exposing all the horror. They found Chloe first, still huddled in the corner. Then they found me sitting motionless beside the massive block of metal. And finally, their beams came to rest on where Mark lay. I heard one of the cops gasp. Another one muttered a curse under his breath. As they carried me out, I glanced back one last time. The image will be burned into my mind forever. Mark's body pinned under the wreckage, his arms still outstretched, his fingers just inches away from the shattered camera. As if even in death, he was still trying to get that final shot. The shot of a lifetime. They said we were down there for 6 days. For me, it was a lifetime.
You've just heard the tragic story recorded from the testimony of Sarah, the sole survivor of the fateful expedition to the Pennhurst Asylum. According to the official report, Mark's death was ruled a tragic accident caused by the severe structural decay of the facility. Chloe underwent long-term psychiatric treatment for severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and was never able to speak about what happened. As for Sarah, she gave up filmmaking forever, living a reclusive life, haunted by a single fatal decision. Their story is a chilling warning. It reminds us that some places are abandoned for a reason. The echoes of pain in locations like Pennhurst are more than just rumors. They exist in the silence, in the air, and in the very decay of the walls themselves. The greatest danger doesn't always come from supernatural entities, but from human recklessness and ambition. The worst trap isn't a slamming door or a ghost, but an irreversible wrong decision, made in a moment when desire overcomes fear. Always remember, when you stare into the darkness, sometimes ... the darkness stares back. Thank you for joining us in the darkness of Pennhurst. If tonight's story resonated with you, please leave a like to let us know. And don't forget to subscribe to Horror Stories Hub and turn on notifications so you never miss another true horror story from across America. Most importantly, we want to hear from you. What state's horrors do you want us to explore next? New Jersey and the Jersey Devil? Or Louisiana and the legends of voodoo? Let us know your choice in the comments below. I'm your host, and remember, always double check what's behind a closed door. Good night.